In the global economy are temporary expectations of the recovery in air travel after a difficult few years of the pandemic.
So while it's possible for people to travel a little bit easier today,
Australia's aviation industry is paying a heavy price to stay in the skies, with laid-off Qantas workers forced to say goodbye to their colleagues.
Industrialization has changed the world forever. And some industries have changed the world so dramatically that they have gone bigger than the economies of many countries. One such industry is the aviation industry. This case study will explore the positives and negatives of the aviation industry so that you can get a clear view of what United, Delta, or Emirates Airlines are providing to the world. The aviation industry provides such a big contribution to the global economy that the lives of more than 100 million people depend upon it. The revenue contribution of aviation in the global economy is more than the contribution of most countries in the world. If aviation was a country, it would be on the list of the top 20 richest countries. The aviation industry supports more than 63 million jobs worldwide, and 3.5% of the GDP of the world economy comes from this sector. The industry generates a revenue of $2.7 trillion to support the global economy annually. If the aviation industry stops, the world economy will face a huge crisis, and literally, more than 60 million people around the world will lose their jobs. Again, being the 20th largest economy in the world, aviation would even surpass Argentina and Switzerland in terms of GDP. The workforce of aviation includes the crew of the airplanes, corporate staff working in the airports, and the ground staff. The external workforce related to the aviation industry is the navigators, suppliers of different elements, manufacturers, and also cargo logistics-related parties. This large number of people connected to the aviation industry makes it so big. The aviation industry doesn't only help the people working in it, but also it is a contributor to the tourism industry. Tourism is crucially supported by the aviation industry around the globe. The tourism industry alone is responsible for around 10% of the global GDP, and it employs more than 350 million people around the world. And a big portion of tourism revenue is generated through the aviation industry. In countries like Thailand and Maldives, where tourism is the largest sector providing national revenues, the aviation industry is a significant contributor. The industry is bigger than the automobile manufacturing industry and the pharmaceutical industry. Aviation provides crucial links for connectivity, which is a huge contributor to global economic and financial development. It has changed the world forever. The industry has made the world an easier place to live in. While before the globalization of aviation, it took people weeks, months, or more than that to move from one part of the world to another. But commercial aviation has changed the scenario forever. The industry has made life simple and saved an incalculable amount of time for nations. One interesting fact is, aviation is the carrier of only 0.5% of global goods. But more interestingly, the value aviation carries is immense. The 0.5% of the goods carried by the aviation industry value 34.6% of the exported goods around the world. Only goods of higher value and higher frequency are transported by aviation for the time it saves and the safety it provides. This is how aviation has become one of the major players in the world economy. There have been very rare situations when the aviation industry had been stopped totally. At the beginning of the 21st century, when the 9/11 attacks on the US occurred, the aviation industry stopped. Adding to that, after the Eyjafjallajökull volcano erupted in the year 2010, commercial aviation stopped. Though the industry stopped for a short period, it interrupted the lives of an immense number of people working in it. During COVID-19, world aviation didn't stop fully, but flights were restricted to almost less than 10% of the regular flights. At that moment, the people working in the industry faced a financial crisis. Over the year 2020, they faced this crisis. The International Air Transport Association works relentlessly to ensure the economic betterment of the aviation industry. The organization has estimated a loss of $76 billion only for European carriers in the year 2020. Also, the magnitude of this loss is the risk of 5.6 million jobs working in the aviation industry in Europe alone. Moreover, the GDP contributions made by aviation only in Europe is more than $378 billion. The number of people working in the aviation industry is immense, which makes the industry powerful and significant to the global economy. This shows how important commercial aviation has become to the people of the world. But with positives, negative impacts also arise. We will look into the negatives of commercial aviation in this segment of the case study. Negative impacts of aviation on the environment. Though the aviation industry is a large source of revenue to the world GDP, the negative impacts of the industry on the globe have been very critical over time. Only from air transportation in 2018, 895 million tons of carbon dioxide were generated. On average, 42 billion tons of carbon dioxide are generated by different human-made industries every year. And 2% of this pollution came from the aviation industry alone every year. Though the aviation industry has been constantly working on reducing the level of emissions, the number of passengers in aviation increases by around 5% a year. There are three main reasons why aviation is growing day by day. They are the increase in world population and globalization of resources, increased investments in aviation technology, modernization of operations in the industry. After World War II, the world economy stabilized compared to the 20th century. A large number of European and Western nations have set themselves as developed nations, and the inter-country aviation demand has been growing constantly. And with time, people's concern over the growing carbon emissions around the world has also been on the rise. So, a growing carbon footprint is unacceptable for any industry, and the carbon emissions in the aviation industry come from 4 different units. They are air traffic management, aviation manufacturing, regular flights, airports. Considering carbon emissions as a big environmental factor here, let's compare the carbon emissions between industries. This will help us get a critical view of the actual impacts of aviation compared to other industries. The largest contributor to carbon emissions in the world has been the agricultural sector for a long time. For food production, the world faces an immense rate of 44% carbon emissions globally every year. The second largest sector contributing to global carbon emissions is the road transport sector with 17%. The third sector with the highest emissions is the buildings constructions industry with a rate of 10%, while the clothing manufacturing industry is also accountable for around 10% of global carbon emissions. While aviation, which is producing only 2% of the carbon emissions, is even less than the iron industry with 5% or the cement manufacturing industry with 4%. So, it is not the aviation industry that is contributing largely to global environmental pollution. Compared to some other major industries, aviation is a small player in this crisis. But that's not the end. There are some other environmental damages done by the aviation industry, which makes the industry vulnerable in the eyes of environmentalists. The exhaust fumes from aircraft engines are made of 7 to 8% of carbon dioxide and 0.03% of nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, unburned hydrocarbons, and carbon monoxide. Also, the aircraft create water vapor trails, which many researchers suggest hurts the environment. But research has been still ongoing about the impacts of water vapor on the environment. Some researchers also suggest that aviation has a greater impact on environmental pollution as the height of the emissions is higher compared to any other industry. Though the height of carbon emissions doesn't have any external impacts, the emissions of nitrogen oxide and water vapor at higher levels can have negative impacts on higher altitudes. Research is constantly ongoing on how to reduce the level of environmental damage the aviation industry causes, but compared to other industries and the level of impact it has on the lives of people employed in it, the aviation industry is a crucial element of the global economy. Also, the major economic impacts made by the aviation industry are immense, which cannot be denied. This case study illustrated how the aviation industry is contributing both in positive and negative ways to the globe. Now, it's your decision whether to take a flight or not. And what's your perspective on the matter? Let us know in the comments below.